letting people in the room, right?
I figured once we're ready to do it, then I'll bring them up. It'll take just a moment for YouTube to start up. All right, YouTube looks like it's up, and I am letting everybody in from the waiting room when you're ready.
Let them in.
All right, everybody is in, and the waiting room is disabled for now.
All right. Well, it's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call to order the town hearing to discuss the budget dated May 12th, 2020. I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Well, I guess we'll continue on here. We have a bunch of people now that have just come in to the room. For all of you, I'd like to open up by thanking you for coming and listening to us to present the budget to you tonight during this difficult year. I'd like to, before we start, clarify again that this was mandated by the governor that we go through this process. We've taken long hours and worked with the Steve and Marcia and the other departments to try to get this in an order that we can present to the town. Dan Dvorak will present this budget for us. So he'll walk us through the presentation. Then we will open it up to public comment once the presentation is done. Once we go to public comment, we'll allow 2 minutes for each speaker. I will at 15-second mark ask politely to start to wind down, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. We'll take them as you raise your hand to get into the comment section, and we'll do as best we can to get through this together. If there are any mistakes on the presentation, I take full responsibility. Steve and Marcia worked hard to get me all the information I needed. We put it all together basically today due to the timing of people finalizing everything. So if there are mistakes, I take full responsibility and we can move forward. So at that point, Dan, it's on you. Please lead us.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Glenn. Dan, are you going to put the presentation on the screen?
Yep, I am pulling that up right now.
Wonderful. Well, while you do that, I echo Glenn's thanks to everybody for participating in this process and listening in tonight and hopefully giving your comments at the end. Clearly, it's an unprecedented time for all of us. I hope everybody online and everybody is safe and healthy and as sane as possible as we work through this. Glenn outlined the process already, so we will move on to slide 4, I believe. There we go. Thank you. So I just want to go into a little bit more detail about the process and what a typical year looks like and the out of the ordinary situation we're in this year. In a typical year, all the town departments, the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen would work on the budgets in January and February. The Board of Selectmen and First Selectmen would present the Board of Finance with a proposed budget in early March. And then throughout the month of March, the Board of Finance meets with all town departments, deliberates, and proposes a budget to move forward to referendum. All of that happened. We were prepared with a budget that was going to go to public hearings such as this in the auditorium and move forward to referendum. And then the world changed on us. As Glenn pointed out, through a series of executive orders, the governor has prohibited municipalities from holding public town meetings and from holding public referendums, and has mandated the legislative and budget setting authority, in the case of Brookfield, that is the Board of Finance, to set and adopt the budget on behalf of the town without a referendum. So that's where we are right now. In early April, the Board of Selectmen, at the request of the Board of Finance, did grant an extension to the timeline per their authority to allow the Board of Finance as much time as possible to go through all the numbers, to get as up-to-date information as possible up to today and even beyond today, so that we can make the best decision for the town. And that's where we are. So the Board of Finance has met weekly since early April, pouring through the numbers and trying to balance all the priorities of the town to get to this point. Some of those priorities are conflicting, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Past this public hearing, we will continue to meet on a weekly basis up until the deadline that we have to make sure that we get it right. Now, I said that the priorities of the town, there are many, and they include providing proper services to the town and schools, investing in our long-term capital plan to maintain our assets and manage our debt burden, to concentrate on our credit rating as we prepare to borrow for the largest capital project in town history, and we also need to remain sensitive to the needs of the taxpayers. Over the last few weeks, the Board of Finance has received over 100 emails on the budget topic, which is wonderful. Those emails are split pretty evenly between people requesting increased investment in education and town services, and those requesting that the taxes be held as close to flat as possible, due both to economic hardship and the lack of an ability to vote. Those conflicts, those points of view are both valid, but they are in direct conflict, and the Board of Finance took it very seriously. Making a decision that impacts every resident, every property owner, and every business in town is really a daunting task that the six of us did not take lightly. I can tell you personally, the number of hours spent going through the numbers, number of sleepless nights trying to figure out what is right. It's a really major undertaking. We weighed the immediate needs of the town, the long-term goals, and weighed that with the economic realities we're facing. And we made what we thought was the best decision for the town. What you see here was unanimously approved by the Board of Finance for presentation to the town and received the enthusiastic support of the first select. So with that as a backdrop, let's get started and move on to the next slide. So going into every budget year, there's goals and there's concerns and constraints, and this year is no different in that regard, but the concerns are led by the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what does that affect on the revenues, and what does that affect on the expenditures. We'll get into that in good detail later on. Also need to look at state grant revenues and what's going to the trend that those are going in. Obviously, the education budget is a major driver, being 2/3 of the overall town budget, and increased special ed costs, which are mandatory and out of Board of Ed's control, do continue to increase. We'll hear more about that later. We have a 10-year capital plan that includes the new school, but includes a lot of stuff in addition to the new school, which we'll go over. And then we need to match those revenues and match with the expenses to provide a balanced budget on an annual basis and try to achieve positive growth. At the same time, while we look at those concerns, we want to continue to drive the town forward and achieve as many of our goals as possible. First and foremost, in providing the appropriate and best funding solutions for the town and the school budget. We do need to be sensitive to taxpayer concerns and during this time manage that as well. Need to find a proper balance in our capital spending each year to preserve our capital assets, to maintain our buildings, maintain our vehicles, maintain all of our facilities, but do so in a responsible way that preserves borrowing ability for the school, and most importantly, preserves our credit rating so that when we do borrow for the school, it is at the most beneficial interest rates possible. So those were the overall goals and concerns. Next slide, Dan. At a high level, what we're presenting to you tonight is an expense budget totaling $71.5 million That is approximately 1.47 million greater than last fiscal year, or 2.09% increase in expenses. At a high level, and again, we'll dig in later, the town budget is $18.95 million. That's an increase of $58,000, or just 0.31% over last year. The education budget is 40, where's that number? 45.44 million dollars. That's an increase of $1.43 million, or 3.25%. In addition to those two major drivers, there's other pieces. There's approximately $5 million of debt service and approximately $2 million of cash capital and other, quote unquote, other categories. Important in that other, and we'll, again, I keep saying this, but we'll get into that in more detail, is an additional $500,000 in contingency, which is to be used specifically for increased costs directly related to COVID expenses, either on the town or the school side, whether it's cleaning, whether it's EMS requirements, whether it's school-related opening issues, that is earmarked specifically for COVID-related issues. We all understand that that's a big unknown. We put that in as a contingency to be used, but we will be reviewing that on a monthly basis and making adjustments as needed throughout the year, knowing that things continue to change very rapidly. Next slide. This has been an iterative process all along. Every year it is. This year, more so than most. On the town side of the budget, the first selectman first presented to the Board of Selectmen a $19.57 million budget that was adjusted a bit downward by the rest of the Board of Selectmen and presented us with something a shade under $19.5 million. And excuse me, the Board of Finance as a whole really felt that budget was well presented, well thought out, and quite a responsible budget. Steve and Marcia and their staff did a good job of meeting with their departments and providing the required expenses, proper investments, and not much more. So the Board of Finance did not make too many adjustments to that budget. You'll see that the overall increase year to year, even before the COVID adjustment, was relatively modest. And then when we adjusted with the Board of Selectmen and the first Selectmen's urging, quite honestly, to further reduce it to the 0.3% increase with the contingency, that's what you see here. Next slide. Just as important as the expense piece of the budget, you have to look at the revenue side. And when building a budget for a municipality, they have to balance. So whatever you budget for expenses has to be met with corresponding revenues. The revenue stream for the town is made up of a number of different pieces, but 93–94% of it is a result of property taxes. And in all of the revenue line items, things that we thought we knew at the beginning of the process, turns out that were changes and we didn't know, and things that were true in February and March are no longer true in April and May. And that really runs the gamut on all of the revenue lines and provides an even greater challenge to this budget process than in past years. I said that the revenue is largely from the collection of taxes, and we are really strong at collecting those taxes. Generally a greater than 99% collection rate on an annual basis, and those back taxes are collected over a period of time. That started to tick downward over the last year or two, and given the current economic realities, is ticking downward further. It's not a lot, it's not huge. If we normally were somewhere a shade north of 99% collection rate, now we're a shade south of 99%. But that small marginal decrease in collection rate adds up to real dollars when you're talking about $70 million budget, and that needs to be addressed. The grand list did increase modestly, which offsets some of that collection rate a bit, but not entirely. The rest of the revenue lines are smaller, but also important, and also decreasing. You'll see that the revenue from the state has decreased from past levels. We think that it's going to be held rather flat in this current budget year, but that's a bit of a risk. But we feel pretty good about that. Other revenue line items, including permit fees and licenses for building on your homes and other permits, we're projecting that's going to be down this year. Clearly, if you're paying attention to the markets and interest rates, which it's fun for me, not so much for others. Rates are at historic lows, which is good on some regards, but in terms of our investment earnings, that's going to impact that and other revenue. So really, each of the revenue line items is taking a incremental hit downward, which we need to balance on the expense side one way or another. Next slide. So there you go. Thank you. We'll fast forward to the conclusion here and then dig into the details. So when you combine the expenses from 2 slides ago with the revenues from the previous slide, we are proposing a mill rate for the coming fiscal year of 29.65 mils. That is 0.51 mil increase over last year, or a 1.76% increase to the mill rate, which is what the taxes are based upon. So it would be a 1.76% increase in taxes is what we're proposing. Now, the main takeaways on this slide, I firmly believe in. We're working on best practices for preparing a budget in this environment. It's not easy. We must balance the expense needs. The driver of the growth is clearly the schools, which are definitely needed. But we also need to balance out the needs of the taxpayers. We have planned for a bit of a worst case scenario, both in terms of mostly in terms of revenue. We do have the contingency in there that can be used. And if things evolve a bit better than expected, we'll be able to be flexible and adapt to that. But doing it the other way around would have been irresponsible. Next slide. And then to sum it up, getting to what does this mean for the average taxpayer? Obviously, to some people, any increase is not going to be palatable. We understand that. To others, what we're proposing isn't even close to enough. Understand that as well. But to put it into context, where we are with an average home of about $350,000, and the mill rate increase we're talking about is $126 a year, $10 to $11 a month. We believe that is a nice balance of meeting the needs that we can while being sensitive to the taxpayers. I think that there's a calculator on the website to do your specific tax increase based upon your specific assessment. I know it was there in the past. If not, hopefully it can be put back up. Steve and Marcia can address that later on. Next slide. So digging into some of the details, I'll do some of the town operations, and then we'll turn it over to Rosa Fernandez, Chair of the Board of Ed, to talk about the Board of Ed budget. So on the town, I'm just going to hit some of the percent changes that might jump out at people. All of the detail, line by line, is on the town website now for those of you who want to dig in detail. I recognize some of the names in the waiting room and know that will happen, and good for you. In terms of on this slide, we did move small recurring items that were previously identified as capital. We moved them to operating, just felt it was more accurate description of what those expenses were. The regional animal control, regional memberships you see had a big jump. And that is definitely, that's a consortium of a number of towns. They are proposing an increase to Brookfield that is currently under negotiation. But what we've planned here is a worst case. It's important to do that. And then we continue to fund our town pension obligations. That's an important, really important consideration for rating agencies and really for the health of the long-term health of the town. We're in very good shape from a pension standpoint. The OPEB funding, which is a level of detail that I won't go into here, is something that we have taken funding away from in order to support this year's annual needs, and we'll have to replenish that in the future. It's something that was we felt we had flexibility on, and our financial advisor thought it was reasonable to use. Next slide. On this, more detail on a line by line, again, concentrating on the line items that have particularly high percentage increased. EMS is an area of really, in these times, it's important. There is an added shift to EMS. We're now running 3 shifts 24/7, or 3 shifts, I mean, yeah. So we're running EMS 24/7. We've also added additional cleaning protocols to the vehicles and to the equipment, all really, critical to maintain the health and safety of the residents, which is job one of everybody, but does add expense. The recycling line item has a decent increase on a percentage basis. Another one of those consortiums that we pay into. The senior center is a little confusing. That was a change. There's really not, on a net basis, there's not that much of a change. But again, it's the way it's being presented. In the past, revenue and expenses were lumped together. This year, at our Director of Finance's suggestion, the more accurate way to present that is to separate them out. So while you see an increase in expenses here, there's a corresponding increase in revenues on the other slide. So the net change isn't really that big a deal. There is a decent change to the library, small dollar amount, but decent percent. We continue to honor a multi-year agreement to get the library up to proper staffing levels, and we feel that's a really important to do. Parks and grounds, there's some one-time costs and some seasonal payroll that need to go in. And then, like I said, there's 2 contingencies. The contingency on this sheet is not the one I was talking about before. This is a bit under $300,000 of additional contingency, and this is related to a couple of union negotiations that are ongoing that may require some additional expense. And really, it's to provide a bit of wiggle room to town government. The budgets are really tight, and it provides a bit more wiggle room in case to provide some flexibility in uncertain times. Next slide. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Fernandez, who will talk about the Board of Ed, and then it'll come back to me to follow up on the rest of the items.
Thanks, Dan. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Board of Finance for allowing me to speak to this slide. And definitely thank you all for your many, many hours of working on this and getting us to this point. I'm going to take up a little bit of your time tonight. I apologize, but the Board of Ed has spent exhaustive hours and will continue after this meeting to publicly deliberate over the position that we now find ourselves in. And quite honestly, we're struggling to find any other solution other than what I'll outline briefly tonight. What I will continue to reiterate here, and to the many who have written us, is that the Board of Ed stands behind our original budget that we adopted back in January. It's a budget that meets our goals, goals that we've always had for our budgets, and that are outlined at the top left of this slide. I won't go through each of those budget goals here, but I'll briefly state that our overarching priority is to keep an equitable experience for all students and to continue to move the district forward in addressing our needs and keep an eye on the future. What we don't want to do is focus on what we'll lose and play catch up year after year. So we're going to move on in the best way we can with whatever we've got. That said, the reality everyone should understand here tonight is that we will lose things and potentially people, considering what's presented to you tonight. So as many of you may know, we've been talking about significant increases in costs related to special education, and that's not going away next year. Of course, every year we have contractual obligations and inflation. So we're looking at about $2.5 million in have to do's. Add to that increasing enrollment at center school, our high school and elementary kids needing some extra support in math, and an increasing population of English language learners. And it's clear that our ask is not really full of a bunch of nice to have investments. I think it's important to outline what we have already done to get us to this point. So back in February, when we were originally faced with an $817,000 reduction to our request for these funds, the board took the following actions in cooperation and close collaboration with the Board of Finance. And I want to highlight these for you so it's clear that a significant amount of tightening has already been done. So first, we removed any contingency built into the budget for unforeseen special education costs. So this accomplished the largest portion of that reduction. And the Board of Finance has assured us that we have their support for these types of expenses in the future. So again, thank you for that. On another strong recommendation from the Board of Finance, we took a much bigger risk on our salary line, which basically means we're banking on having about $200,000 in net underruns. And we're fairly comfortable with that, but it is a risk for our ability to manage, budgetary variants that are typically found in education budgets. As a fortunate thing to sort of break our way after we originally constructed the budget is that we're not going to have as much in the way of health insurance expenses than we originally thought. And then proactively, we did reduce salary raises for unaffiliated folks. We reduced a part-time clerical position, some professional development, and we shaved down a lot of supply and textbook accounts. So we were able to accomplish that initial pre-COVID reduction without really reducing anything directly student-facing, with some risk that we assumed. What we're grappling with now is another $770,000 in reductions, and that is posing some real challenges for us. So right away, realizing a surplus of around $500,000 this year because schools are closed, we are going to be able to make some one-time purchases that are meant for next year. So what we call these pull-ahead items, total about $100,000, which leaves still a fairly healthy return going back to the town. Next, we decided to reduce a little more from professional development and various supply accounts, as well as use funds from the cafeteria fund and the student activity fund to offset the budget. So in total, this next tier of reductions yielded another $172,000. So we're up to about $272,000 of reductions that can be done relatively easily with some indirect impact to students, but nothing that the board felt would majorly impact the district. The last $500,000 is where, and I'm really not being dramatic, but it's really going to hurt. So as a board, we will likely not vote on any official reductions until we have an official figure of funding from the town. But what we have seriously considered is the elimination of K-6 world language, investments for math support at the elementary level, investments related to BHS after school security, investments for support for our English language learners, freshman sports at BHS, all sports at Wisconsin, the reinstatement of pay to play, and a reduction in teaching positions. So let me be clear that the Board of Ed is in no way advocates for these reductions, and I really don't think anyone here is. Not only does this community value these things, and in many cases, keeping them is just the obvious right thing to do for kids, but also because they cause issues down the road that we'll have to tend to. And we really need to think beyond COVID. So some of you here may be questioning why we can't take elsewhere. Why are we considering teaching positions? Why is world language always on the table? And the most straightforward answer to that is that there are just too many things that we are mandated and contractually obligated to do. And there are too many things and people that support the ability to carry out those obligations. And there's simply nowhere else to go in the budget. So I have already outlined how we've taken over $1 million from the school budget, assuming a lot of risk, and we simply must cut into our existing programs and staff in order to accomplish the rest. So what you have before you tonight is a proposal to increase the BOE budget by over 3%. And that may seem like a lot in times like this, but I just urge everyone to remember that what drives our requested increase is much more than that. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rosa. Appreciate that and well presented. Next slide, I'm gonna do a bit more on education from Board of Finance perspective, try to avoid repeating things that were said and also avoid counterpoint, but just provide a little bit more perspective and context. Firstly, the 3.25% proposed increase to the Board of Ed budget is a meaningful increase. It's a top quartile budget increase over the last decade plus that's been approved by taxpayers. Now, certainly every year has a story, every year has needs. This year is no different, but the bottom line is that what the Board of Finance is proposing is a top quartile increase to the education budget without the benefit of public referendum. And that's going to be controversial to everybody. And that's just what it is. So next slide. Similar iterative process on the Board of Ed side that I explained on the on the town side. The superintendent presented budget to the Board of Ed in December and January. The Board of Ed provided some minor adjustments and then presented that to both boards in a tri-board meeting and then officially to the Board of Selectmen and First Selectmen in January or February. The Board of Selectmen adjusted that downward over $800,000. We'll get into the collaborative work and a little bit more detail around what Rosa was talking about to get to that number. And then that number, the $46.2 million, was what we were prepared to go forward with to this public hearing and eventually to referendum. And then, as I've said multiple times, the world changed. We dug in further and made some hard choices, hard decisions, and further reduced the allocation to the Board of Ed over the last several weeks to end up with the numbers you see here today. Next slide. Rosa went through this already, but for those of you who want to look at the specific numbers, again, the first 817 or the first 800,000 and change of reductions that were made pre-COVID were really a collaborative effort among all boards. It wasn't always fun, it wasn't always pretty, but it was certainly collaborative. And there were a number of areas that are important. Rosa talked about the special ed contingency. And what that means is that if costs are higher than projected because additional students move into the district, in the past, that was a Board of Ed responsibility to come up with funds or ask the town for recoupment. And we have agreed that by removing that contingency, the town will fund those additional expenses. It's a responsibility of the entire town to fund the proper education. And those expenses are important, and we've taken that risk. So that's almost $300,000 of adjustment and further potential risk that's moved over to the town side. We talked about a decrease in the insurance premiums. That was just updates to numbers from January to March. So that another $170,000 almost of expense that is really just budget adjustment. Rosa talked about the salary reduction risk. That again is budgeting nitty gritty. It's not cutting any individual salary. It's not cutting any individual position. It's budgeting for expectations over the course of the year. There was about $110,000 of funds that were we scrubbed the Board of Ed and the town scrubbed the certain outside accounts and found some funds there. And then there were additional efficiencies that again totaled almost $110,000. So from that combination of what I call, and I know that not everybody agrees, but I don't call those cuts, I call those budget adjustments. And that is that makes up the majority of the $800,000 that was originally proposed to be cut, to be adjusted. Beyond that, to get to the $1.48 million, there is an additional $700,000 of real cuts that Rosa certainly identified, and I don't dispute that we'll start to cut some muscle. And again, expect it to be controversial on all sides. Next slide. So moving on to the other pieces of the budget, just a couple more minutes. I appreciate your time, and then we'll move to public comment on the capital projects. This is really critical piece to understand. There are certain capital items that we really need to continue to maintain, not just paving the roads, but continuing to replace vehicles, making sure that the police have the proper vehicles and equipment, making sure that fire and EMS are properly equipped, and that we fund reserves so that we don't end up in a bigger problem down the road if we cut those. It would be very easy to say we're not funding any capital and that would solve all the problems, but that's really short-term thinking and would 1, 2, 5 years down the road create even bigger problems. So we maintained a discipline of continuing to fund capital items that were critical to maintenance, critical to funding future reserves, so that large purchases down the road are funded over time as opposed to in a one-year time frame. That said, we do have a 10-year capital plan, and items that didn't fall into what I just described were either delayed or decreased in order to make sure that while we continue to fund what's needed, we can maybe put a pause for a year on more discretionary capital items that can assist for this year's needs. Next slide. And then finally, debt service. Most people's eyes will glaze over unless you're John Lucas or Marcia Marion or me, but approximately $5 million in debt service year to year on our existing debt. That fluctuates, as principal gets paid down and principal gets reborrowed, making sure again that we prepare ourselves for the large borrowing in the next 24 months or so. One accomplishment that did happen under the guidance of our town finance department and our town treasurer was we were able to during this past year refinance some of our longer term bonds to take advantage of the historically low interest rates and save a decent amount of money over the life of those bonds. So kudos to the Treasury Department for executing on that. And that's about it there. Next slide. I think that's it. So yeah, that is the extent of the prepared remarks. I turn it back over to Glenn to manage the public comment portion of the meeting.
Dan, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Very clear, concise presentation. Can't thank you enough for your time and effort on that. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Dan number 2, let's bring on public comment. Please raise your hand. When you raise your hand, like we said, state your name and address. We'll give you 2 minutes. At the 15-second mark, when you have 15 seconds left, I will give you a gentle nudge to politely close it up as best as possible so we can move on to the next. Thank you. Anyone up?
All right. For those of you trying to have public comment, I do see a few of you with hands raised on your cameras. Also, if you're looking at your participant list in Zoom, you should see a little raise hand button at the bottom. But first, I see we have a Shane Peters. I'm unmuting you. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you all doing? First, I want to say thank you to the Board of Finance for all your hard work during this time. I realize this is extremely difficult, so a sincere, heartfelt thank you to all of you for everything you've put in. I'm speaking tonight to advocate for the children of the community
need your name and
that
address,
really have no
please.
voice. My apologies, Shane Peters, 26 Powderhorn Hill.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. So again, thank you very much for your hard work. I'm speaking tonight to advocate for the children of the community that really have no voice in this process. Both my wife and I are educators in 2 different nearby communities and have been teaching for about a combined 30+ years. So I can fully appreciate what you are all going through, but I feel that there's a way to be both fiscally responsible and give the children in our community the education that they need to be successful. I would ask during this difficult time that we do keep the pressure on minimizing spending, but to please stop cuts in an educationally responsible place. Based on my research and what was presented by the superintendent recently, in my opinion, being responsible to the children of the community would be adding about $405,000 back into the budget from the most recent round of cuts. I can certainly appreciate that the people in this community are dealing with difficult situations right now, but sacrificing the education of our future is not the way to ease those situations. I understand that the 3.25% increase is a top 3 increase over the last decade, but I also think it's a bit misleading because it kind of sounds like this increase is great for our schools. That's really not the case. Enrollment is on the rise and special ed costs obligations are skyrocketing. As Ms. Fernandez stated, these are areas that are not ignorable and must be taken care of. Without adding back approximately $405,000, there will be cuts to programming and there will be reductions to teaching staff. This will further increase class size and deprive the children in this community of a sound education. It also sounds like, based on what I just heard from Ms. Fernandez, that there's going to be a hefty educational surplus this year being given back to the community that could be used to help out our schools for the 2021 school year. I know some residents are concerned with paying more in taxes, but a rather modest increase would not only help our schools, but also help our local economy. If we want to pump money back into our community, then we need to get people spending money in Brookfield. Our schools are a major attraction to new families, and without properly funding the school system, people will not continue to move to this town and spend money at its local businesses. I would respectfully remind the Board of Finance that we still have the chance to give the children of the community a great education while still being fiscally responsible during this difficult time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next. Any other public comment?
I don't see anybody with their hand raised as an icon. Oh, actually,
Laura.
Laura Orban,
Laura.
I'm muting you. Laura, go ahead.
Hi, Laura Orban, 95 Stony Hill Road. So I really thank you all for your hard work. I know this was not a position you expected to be in. And I have to say, watching you go through this process, you really did an exceptional job. And you were really thorough and open about how you went about it. And I commend all of you on your work. So thank you for that. I just, my comment about the Board of Ed budget, I think the issue here is I have two issues. Brookfield, we really are not as a town committed to excellence in education. We cut that slide that showed how the Board of Ed has gotten an increase, how so many years, that's actually like totally irrelevant because you're not looking at what the needs were or what the request originally was. So to show that there was an increase in the absence of like the data that surrounded it doesn't really tell us anything. And that's not relevant. That's not the job of the Board of Finance, right? To say, well, you got other increases, so this one you should be happy with. The role here is to say, the Board of Ed says this is what our kids need. And the reason this is so detrimental is because every year the budget gets cut. Where was the chart that showed us how the budget gets chopped every year? It does. So here we are now, and there's like no wiggle room. And, I just want to say that the kind of mentality of, the Board of Ed needing to help the town out, excuse me, by cutting the ed budget, I think that's, how would it feel if we started saying, the town doesn't care about kids. Every time you guys want to cut the budget, you don't care about kids. Helping the town out is cutting the education budget and sacrificing kids' education isn't helping anybody. It's not helping the town. And I think we need to stop, having that mindset. I don't think that these are good sacrifices, especially when we're not talking about like $200 for a year for a house, the average household. Nobody's going to make or break their
15
household
seconds,
budget
Laura.
and have to leave.
Seconds.
Yep. They're not going to have to leave the town for $200. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. And thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next comment, please.
At the moment, I don't see anybody with their hand up.
Yes, we do.
Here we have one person. Roger, you are unmuted.
Hi, thank you very much for all the hard work you guys are doing. I know that's been said, but it can't be said enough. With that, it's very disconcerting that you're looking to
Need your
propose
name
a
and address,
$1.6
please.
million
Name and
cut.
address, please.
Oh, sorry. Got it. Roger Ciriello, 13 Red Barn Lane, Brookfield, Connecticut.
Thank you.
People come to live in this town because of the strength of our school system. We feel that the proposed education budget cut will weaken our schools and diminish our town's prestige. We completely understand the constraints you guys are under with the effects of the pandemic, but the full cut you're looking for will adversely affect our school system for years to come. I know everybody says this is my town, you can't do this, but please do not forget, this is your town too. You have to live here. The kids need to be educated. This will affect property values for years to come. These cuts would impact teachers that have gone above and beyond to educate our children remotely. Please do not punish them. We understand our belts need to be tightened, but you have to be very careful with these cuts, especially since there is no town vote as a check on what you're proposing. But please, do not tighten the belt so tight. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments.
All right, I believe one of our selectmen, Harry, you had your hand up.
Yes, I did.
Harry's name, address, please.
Yes, Harry Shaker, 87 Long Meadow Hill Road, and I am a selectman, but I am speaking as a resident. First off, again, I want to thank the Board of Finance for such a dedicated effort in a position which really no board in the history of the state of Connecticut has ever had to be in. I have been able to see up front the amount of time and effort and concern, not only for the people who support a higher budget, but for the people who are trying to keep the budget as low as possible in lieu of the situation we're in. As far as the budget goes, again, I just wanted to make a couple quick comments. I'll be short. I can't remember the last time other than in 2008 when a education budget was cut. It's not the educational, it's not the Board of Ed budget that's being cut. It's the proposed budget that is being cut. This year's Board of Education number is not less than last year. It's not being cut. It's actually over $1 million more. That being said, I understand the dilemma that the Board of Education is in, being 14 years on the Board of Ed, and I sympathize with you. I know what it feels like to be where you are at. And I'm not saying that anything that you're proposing is not needed. I understand the need. But I also understand that I believe that Brookfield in the state of Connecticut is the third highest of all municipalities in unemployment. And really what I want to say is, I think that the Board of Finance has tried to look at every resident in town, not just those who are looking to get additions to the Board of Education or additions to any type of spending, and not only to the people who are trying to keep it as low as possible. I think they've done an excellent job in coming to a median where they're doing the best that they can under the situation that they have been put in. And regardless what the number is, I think they need to be applauded and they need to be supported. And I will support them to the end on their decision, whatever it is. And I want to thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Next.
All right, next we have Leslie. Leslie, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Leslie Ruggiero, 12 Green Ridge Drive. I'm just going to start off by saying I am in support of the original budget put forward by the Board of Education and the library. And full disclosure, I am on the Library Board of Trustees, but I'm speaking as a resident currently. I'm very concerned about the persistent goal of this board over the years to adopt budgets with the intent to get to the lowest increase possible, rather than a budget which provides what the town needs. Nowhere in the description for the duties of the Board of Finance does it indicate that the role of this board is to set the lowest mill rate possible or approve a budget which the board believes is what the town can afford or, as was stated tonight, is sensitive to taxpayers. I'm embarrassed and I'm appalled at what this current situation is and what we're looking at for cuts. You can call them, what was the word? Budget adjustments. These are cuts. This is a long list. These items will be added to a long list of programs and opportunities that our students, our children, Brookfield's children, have lost over the years. And I'm sorry, but this is an embarrassment and it's appalling. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next. Any more comments?
Yeah, this is Steve. Can I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
All right, Steve Dunn, 24 Lindenwood Drive, Brookfield, Connecticut. You know, we've gotten a lot of emails that have discussed how many towns have had a 0% increase in their mill rate. And there are quite a few, and I'd like to go over a couple of them to understand that. So for Brookfield, our town operating budget is going up 1.33%. Our school's operating budget year over year, original budget, is 3.25%. Our capital budget is going up 9.83%, and our debt budget is going down 5.05%, for a total mill rate increase of 1.76. Avon, who advertised a 0% increase in their mill rate, their town operating budget is going up 4.92%. Their school's budget is going up 4.61%. Their capital budget is going up 3.58%, and their debt budget is going up 2.96%. And what they've been doing is using fund balance to make up the difference. We don't need to do that. We don't want to do that in Brookfield because we're trying to finance a new school and need to maintain our credit ratings and improve them. Vernon, the town that ostensibly had the vote by residents and had a referendum, they have 29,000 residents. 110 people voted on their budget. They had a 0% increase in their mill rate. That's a great thing. But if you look at their actual details, they had a 1.81% versus Brookfield's 1.31% increase in their town operating budget. Their school budget went up 1.2, their capital budget went up 4.7, and their debt budget went down went up, 2.96%. And the reason that happened is they were using their fund balance to offset. Lyme had a 4.64% increase in their town operating budget. Their school operating budget went up 1.2. Their capital budget went up 4.7. Their debt budget went down 6.96. Now they had a large debt. They had a huge debt roll off. Even Sherman, local to us, their operating budget, and I talked to Don Lowe, the first selectman there. They have about a $6 million budget for the town. Their town operating budget went up 1.9%. Their school budget went down 0.002%. They did not give me the details on their capital budget, but how they achieved a 0% increase in their mill rate is their debt budget went down 43%, almost half. So that's how they got there. So when we look at these things, we have to be very careful that we understand the underlying drivers of these expenses. And Brookfield, and I've got to commend, I think the Board of Selectmen did a good job on their budget. I think the Board of Finance has done a phenomenal job in balancing all of these conflicting desires on the part of residents, on the part of the town, and on the part of the schools to achieve a budget that makes sense for everybody, given a lot of people aren't going to vote on this. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You guys are the elected representatives of the town. In a representative town meeting, each area of town would elect somebody who would represent them at the town meeting and decide on the budget. In this case, they've elected 6 people, you guys, and you've done a great job. And I think you should be applauded for the work that you've done. The amount of people don't realize the amount of hours all of you have put into this to get to a budget that we think is fair and reasonable. It's just phenomenal. And that shows the, I think, the resilience and the character of Brookfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, next up we have Mr. DeStefan. You are unmuted.
Thank you, Ray DeSteff at 11 Old Woods Road. A lot has been said already, not the least of which is our thanks to every member of the Board of Finance for being so thorough and considerate with your deliberations. That being said, my position is still the same as it was a few weeks ago when I spoke at your meeting. I do not believe this is the time to be making reductions. And if you want to call it reductions to the proposal, that's fine, but it's still a reduction of the proposal. Right now in Washington, they have spent trillions. They are deliberating spending trillions more. That's both Democrats and Republicans debating about what to spend trillions on. And we here in Brookfield are talking about cutting programs for kids. There's something very wrong with that. And for what means? To save people about $10 or $11 a month. This is not a relief program to save people $10 or $11 a month, while at the same time cutting services for children. So while I do appreciate all the effort, I do think we are working from a poor mindset and a poor framework of understanding what's going on here. I would ask the board to reconsider their position and put money back into the education budget in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
All right, we have one more person waiting at the moment. Ms. Matthews, you are unmuted.
Hi, Monique Matthews, 18 Road. I kind of have to just agree with everyone that's been talking tonight that I feel with everything going on in these times, cutting the school budget is probably the worst thing we could do right now. I think a lot what Ray said is we're taking programs away from kids that probably really truly need them more than ever now. I'm worried about special education costs. General ed kids, just need this. This is something that we cannot sit here and think that our kids possibly going back in September need everything and anything. There's going to be kids coming in with social emotional issues, kids that have regressed. There's going to be huge regression. I mean, is the town going to be prepared for that? I don't know. And just to cut our school funding right now is probably just the worst thing that we could possibly do at this time. And I just asked the Board of Finance to really think long and hard about this and to try to really put our kids first and know that we need every single program for these children. And I hope that they will put money back into the budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we also have Mr. Belden would like to make a comment. You are unmuted.
Thank you very much. Bob Belden, 7 Red Barn Lane. And just for the record, I'm on the Board of Education and I'm speaking as a parent and a member of the public, but also with some knowledge of what's going on the Board of Ed. I just wanted to remind the Board of Finance, as you're doing your final deliberations, that as we enter this year, it's a very unique situation that is, it's almost like the perfect storm, right? If you go back to that old movie, we have not had years that have had this kind of outplaced special ed cost. And so that's causing a year-to-year drive. This is the first time in a decade that we are seeing increases in enrollment, and that's causing cost. And at the same time, we're seeing reduced revenues on the school board side. So when you add all of that together and you dissect the budget, what's happening is what's left for the regular year-to-year dynamics for students is far less than what's in the regular contractual increases that one would expect and that is actually in our contracts. So, I'll take issue with Mr. Dvorsis's column of this historical view because it doesn't take into account the perfect storm that we're facing. And I just ask that you consider that as you go through your deliberations in the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Next.
All right, we have Mr. Saluga up next. You are unmuted.
Rich Saluga, 32 Great Heron Lane. I feel compelled to speak for those of us who have asked that the budget be reduced and not increased. I'm just appalled by we hear a lot of false comments coming from the national leadership. And it's just appalling to hear people refer to a 3.25% increase in your budget as a cut. That's just absurd. And it's false and it's wrong. You want to talk about people not getting what they want? How about looking at the elderly relief? It's basically been unchanged for the last decade in Brookfield. So if you got all the seniors together and you said, hey, how about talking about us? I haven't heard one person who supports the Board of Ed budget, original budget, speak about seniors, except we want more of your money. And seniors can't afford it. To hear people talk about, well, it's what's another $200 or $300 a year? Come on, you guys can do it. That's not fair to seniors. And until this town starts talking about everybody in the town, not just students, then we're going to have a struggle. And I just wish people would think about the whole town, not just your one parochial interest. You don't hear seniors coming and saying, hey, give us more money. All we're saying is hold the line on taxes. A lot of other towns, as Steve Dunn pointed out, are trying to do that because we're in tough economic times. I'm a retired teacher. I'm a big supporter of education. There's a lot of money in this Board of Ed budget that could be cut without cutting positions, without cutting programs for kids, but you got to dig into it. The Board of Ed doesn't want to do that. And they've indicated that over the last couple of weeks that they have no interest in doing that.
Rich, 15 seconds.
I'm willing to help out. I'm willing to help the Board of Ed do that. But I think it's wrong for the Board of Finance to increase this budget any more than it already has. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
All right, we have one more gentleman waiting. You are unmuted. Introduce yourself.
Hi, Artie Pilson, 14 Riverview Court. I really have a question. We know how much harm cutting the budget will cause to the Board of Education. My question is, what benefit would the residents of Brookfield gain from these cuts? What benefit would I get? What benefit would any of us get individually? That's my question. Nobody?
Thank you for your comment.
I'd
Steve, you want to take an answer at that, Steve?
Sure. I'm sorry, my camera went off. Let me put that back on. The benefit as perceived by some people in town is that they pay less taxes. No one likes to pay less taxes or more taxes, I'm sorry. So that's the benefit. But when we look at this, and I honestly believe this, we all have a desire to have our properties increase in value. We all have a desire to have our children educated properly and to the highest level possible. We all have a desire to have a safe town where we can go out, walk down our street at 3 o'clock in the morning and not worry about it. We know we're going to be safe. To do that costs money. All those things cost money. So you have to balance the desire of everyone to pay less taxes or not as big an increase in taxes with the desire to get all of those social benefits that we all desire. I want to leave my cars unlocked at night in my driveway. It used to be in Brookfield, you could leave your front door unlocked. You could leave your back door unlocked. You could leave your cars unlocked. You could leave your keys in your car. Unfortunately, I don't think that's true anymore. But if we want to have a safe environment, a town where everyone feels that they're valued, that our children are valued, we need to spend money. And there are some people who don't care. There are some people, they would say, cut the taxes 10%, I don't care. I don't care about public roads. I don't care about police. I don't care about fire. I don't care about ambulance. I don't care about anything. I just want my taxes cut. That's not, and I'm getting on a little bit of a diatribe here, but that's not what America's about. We're about taking care of each other, as Brookfield has done through this entire COVID pandemic. We take care of our own. We've raised now over $40,000 in donations just to take care of our neighbors, not to do anything else. And I believe that this Board of Finance has created a budget that represents both the sides, those sides who say, I don't want any more taxes, and that side who says, spend whatever you have to. I want my kid to get every single thing they want. We have to achieve a balance here, folks. We do. And I think this Board of Finance has done that. And that's the answer to your question, Artie. I'm sorry I took too long.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, Artie, did you have another question?
I was talking about what is the benefit of having $20 a month. That's specifically, not a general conversation about the benefit of reduced taxes. I'm talking specifically, what is the benefit to any one of us to cut the Board of Education? We know it's going to harm the Board of Education. That we know. I want to know what benefit any of us is going to feel from a $20 a month addition to our income. That's my question.
Artie, can I answer again?
Please.
For some families in Artie, for some families in town, $20 a month is a lot of money. We have a number of people out of jobs, and it's the job of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen and the town in whole to achieve a budget increase that makes sense for everyone. $20 a month may not seem like a lot of money to a lot of people, but to some of our residents, it's a lot of money. It is. So, you know, I can't answer your question directly because every family situation is different. And I would tend to agree with you. To me, $20 a month is not a big deal, but to some families it is.
All right, thanks, Steve. All right, next public comment.
Mr. Saluga, you got your hand up again. Did you have another question?
Before we get to Rich, we can't have this a back and forth. We got to make our points and move forward.
Great.
Go ahead, Rich.
No, I would just say, once again, I think it's just false to keep claiming you're cutting the budget when you're getting a 3.25% increase. You know, I know a lot of senior citizens who, even with their increase in Social Security and or their pensions, lost money because they had to pay more for Medicare. So yes, Steve, $20 a month is going to be tough for a lot of people.
All right,
But
thank
if
you.
I can jump in there, Glenn.
Go ahead, Steve. It's a unique year. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I mean,
It's all good. Steve, it's good.
Rich, you're right. Rich Saluga, you're right. but we have to do what's best for everybody. That's what we have to do. I'm finished.
All right, thank you. Shane, next.
I would just like to comment that it's viewed as a cut because of all the necessary spending that we are obligated to do because of state mandates. So while I know it seems like an increase, that quote unquote increase is being spent on things that we have as a town no control over. And therefore the cuts will come in the form of cutting programs and staffing that benefit the other children in the system.
Thank you. Next.
Looks like we have Maria next. Maria, you are unmuted. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, Maria Maria Carpenzano, 1740 Acre Mountain Road in Brookfield. And I just want to make a few comments about what I've heard. First, I'm also agreeing with the increase is not that much. It shouldn't bother. And I understand that $20, it doesn't seem like a lot for a lot of people. I came to Brookfield probably about 30 years ago from Stamford, where it was a huge town and it was high taxes. But I came to Brookfield because of the education that was here and the safety of the town. So the two things that people want out of the town that they live in is the education for their children and to make sure that they're safe. Those are primary things. If we look at some of the towns that you mentioned, like Vernon, that's a very high crime rate. We certainly don't want to become one of them. And that's not a town that is going to be of interest. We are looking at a town that had 30 years ago, I think it was 80% of our kids going on to college as a single parent. That's what I wanted. I wanted a town that I could raise my children in that was safe and they were going to get a great education, because I couldn't afford to send my kids to a private school. And Steve, you were one of my kids' coaches way back when. So I found this town as my new home, and my children still live here and they're raising their families here. And I just don't feel that where you're making these cuts, especially with education, and I know Rich didn't agree with that, it's not a cut, but it is, because you're looking at more people coming in with more needs, and that is driving the cost up. It's not that other things that we're talking about, salaries that are driving things up. That's a part of what it's going to be. You are going to have an increase. And I do want to keep my property value to get, going better. I don't want my property value to go down because the education's is substandard, or it can be lost. When you're talking about kids not being able to play sports, or they have to pay to play, I wouldn't be able to send my kid into sports because I couldn't pay to play. And that's just some of the things. I think kids need language. I think they need that exposure to as much as we can. So thank you very much to everyone here.
Thank you. Next.
Looks like we have Monique. You have your hand up again.
Yeah, sorry. Monique, 18 Road. So I forget who said, what does the $20 more give to the Board of Educational budget? As a parent of a child with a special education student and a general ed student, I can say, and I'm sure every special ed kid and general ed parent can say, that for special ed kids, cutting the budget, cutting services, cutting paras will affect a child. If a para is needed in a class, there might not be a para in that class because we can't afford that para. Maybe during their special ed time, there's 20 kids now in a class instead of before there was 15, because we can't afford another special education teacher because we just don't have the money. In a general ed class, there could be now 26 kids to a class instead of 20 because we can't afford another third grade teacher. So I know I don't want my taxes going up either, My family has been highly affected by this pandemic. I don't want my taxes increased, but I also feel my kids deserve a fair education. My kid deserves a pair in that class if he needs it or she needs it. My kid deserves to only have 20 kids in a class, not 25 kids in a class. This is Brookfield. It's a small town. I moved here from Danbury. Love the town. I moved here for one reason and one reason only. And that was for the education, because I did not want to send my kids to Danbury Public Schools. I grew up in a small town, and that's where I wanted my kids to get their education, in a small town. So when someone says, what is the $20 a month cut or increase going to give us? It's going to give us more paras, more teachers, sports, all that our kids deserve. And it truly, truly affects a special ed kid student if they aren't getting the just services they need, because we don't have the money. So please, if the Board of Finance can truly sit there and think about it, not only affects the general ed students, but it really affects the special ed kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comment?
I do not see any more raised hands on the screen at the moment.
Steve, you want to close out? Closing
Sure.
remark?
Sure. I just want to thank everyone, residents and Board of Finance members, for all the work we've done here. I agree with the previous speaker that in the sense that I've seen many studies that show that if you have the best school system, you have the highest prices on houses. You do. You have the fastest resale value because people want to come to your community. But given all of the things we're going through right now, I think the Board of Finance, I'm not happy with the budget. I don't think anyone is happy with the budget, especially the Board of Finance. But given all the things we're going through right now, I think you guys have formulated a budget that allows us to move slightly ahead and not get behind, so that next year we're not looking at a 6 or 7% increase in our taxes. And I appreciate all the work you guys have done. I know the town doesn't know, but I do. The hundreds of hours you put in, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Steve. Before I close out, anybody on the Board of Board of Finance want to chime in? Dan, closing statement?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks, everybody, for speaking, and the 100 or so people who wrote. Thank you very much.
Mark? Mark, you there?
Yeah, I thought you could see me shaking my head no. Nothing
Oh,
for
no, I
me.
can't see. All right,
Thank you for
Brianna?
the presentation, Ken.
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Eileen?
I just want to thank everyone for your comments and participation tonight. It's nice to hear and know that people are paying attention and participating and recognize that this is not an ideal year and things have not gone any way that anyone would have anticipated. So thank you.
All right, I will close us out then. Thank you to all that called in. Your comments are well appreciated and well taken into account. We've, as Steve has said, we've spent hours upon hours looking at everything. We've tried to come up with the best budget we could to meet all the needs of all the townspeople. Like Steve said, it's nothing that the 6 of us on this Board of Finance wanted to do. We would have loved to put this to vote. And we'd love to have had a perfect year, and it wasn't a perfect year. Again, I'd like to thank Steve and his team for all their support in this and going forward and working with us to really bring this as close to to something that we can all get around as we can. The board voted on it unanimously so far as a 6-0 vote. We will take into account everyone's thoughts. We will have more meetings on this to see where it's going to head and take in as much information as we can, as we have as well to get to this stage. Again, we want the best for the town. There's no doubt about it. We're all here for the town. People have said, I've been here 20 years, 30 years. I've been here 57 years. I've been in Brookfield. I also am a part of Brookfield. So with that said, I'd like to thank you all and tell everyone to have a nice night and bring this meeting to a close. So thank you all very much.
Are you going to ask for a motion?
I will make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a really good night.
You too.